What can a baseball diamond teach us about diplomacy, resilience, and the human heart? I sat down with former Dodgers first-round draft pick turned Middle East scholar, Dr. David Lesch, and award-winning author Catherine Cooke for a remarkable journey. From the pitcher's mound to peace negotiations, from failure to purpose, and from competition to connection. This episode isn't just about one man's extraordinary path. It's about how we can persevere and evolve when life throws us a curveball. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Make It a Great One with Dr. Dan. I'm Dan Peters, psychologist and leadership coach. This show is all about bringing hope, connection, awareness, and wisdom through meaningful conversations that inspire us to be better versions of ourselves and have a positive impact on humanity. This is your space to pause, reflect, and reconnect with who you are, what you care about, and who you want to be. We have this moment, this day, and this life. Let's make it a great one. Today's show is a little different. I have been excited. We have two guests today. We have David Lesch and Catherine Cooke together on a project. The project is a book, a biography of David's life called From Dodgers to Damascus, David Lesch's Journey from Baseball to the Middle East, written by Catherine, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. David is described as a true Renaissance man. He is an acclaimed scholar, educator, author, and conflict resolution specialist. He has advised 5 U.S. presidential administrations about the complex political, religious, and cultural complexities of the Middle East. He is the author or editor of 18 influential books and counting, and is the distinguished professor of Middle Eastern Studies at Trinity University. And before that, which we will be talking about, he was the number 1 draft pick of the Los Angeles Dodgers. Catherine is the award-winning author of 7 books, including The Search of Tom Slick, Explorer and Visionary, which was produced as a podcast starring Owen Wilson and Sissy Spacek by iHeartMedia in 2024, and is currently optioned for film. Early in her writing career, she worked as Coronet's youngest editor-in-chief, among others, and she put Farrah Fawcett on the first national magazine cover. Catherine has had a long career in the nonprofit world as well, serving as CEO on the Mind Science Foundation, World Affairs Council, and several others. And she's an elected fellow and medalist in the International Explorers Club and has carried that organization's flag on several expeditions to remote corners of the world. David and Catherine, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Well, one of my questions, which we will get into, is how this collaboration happened, but I immediately see that you are both explorers and adventurers and share that affinity for the world and exploring the world alike.
Well, I want to say as we get started too, I actually took your life path quiz, wanting to know more about the show before
You did.
and I am so impressed with it. It's really it's quick, it's easy, but a plug for it here. It is really thoughtful. So hats off to you for doing that. And I found that I was a world changer, as I'm sure many of your listeners are. And it made me think that I would have thought that might be more true when I was running nonprofits, trying hard to save the world, if you will, through sustainable development, through the Mountain Institute in the Andes, Himalayas. And then I got to thinking about the fact that a book can really do that too. And it made me think about David Lesch and writing this book, Dodgers to Damascus, that with the messages we impart to our readers, those same formulas that you talk about so beautifully on this show, Dr. Dan, can come through in a book as well. And to answer your question, the way we collaborated, David quickly met for me the 3 criteria I use if I'm going to write a biography. I have to admire its hero. And of course, I certainly admire David Lesch. There has to be a story there that's got some drama and excitement that makes the reader want to turn the next page. And David's story really does. both the Dodgers part and the Middle East adventures are quite phenomenal. And then finally, which I think fits into your show perhaps beautifully, is that we walk away having learned something that we can apply to our own lives, even though we may never get to the Middle East and be working on peace in Syria. The lessons learned there are wonderfully applicable
Hmm.
to, I think, to this show. It was a great experience.
Catherine, that was beautiful. That was absolutely beautiful. And thanks for taking the training. And you are a world changer. So that fits. And David, when you take it, I have a feeling you might find the same. It's a very short, and I do find that it captures people quite well. So I appreciate you saying that. I this is this project, right? This project, which of the writing, and David, of your life, is all about service, right? And Catherine, as we dig deeper into you, right? I mean, your life has been about service, and you write about this as well. Um, I so there's I've just been so excited for this conversation, so many directions to go, and I have to go to 1980. So there were several reasons when I first just read the title and then the blurb, I was all in for my past life and my current life. And so I grew up in Southern California in the LA area, and I bled Dodger blue for the for a good portion of at least the first half of my life before having the conflict moving to Northern California, where I've spent probably 2/3 or 3/4 of my life at this point. Um, but right when I saw that you were the number one pick in 1980, I right away named every single person on the roster. I had the whole infield, I had the whole outfield, I had the pitching staff, of course, Tommy. And that to me was that was the greatest era. I mean, this is before Kirk Gibson and 88 and that big wonderful thing, but this was when teams stayed teams. They like the team stayed together, and to think that I was 10, you were 19, that you showed up there pitching against these guys, meeting Sandy Koufax, and um, it took me back, and I just wonder if we can start there, because this is, as Catherine beautifully writes, like this is the beginning of you being in high pressure situations uh, that you probably couldn't even imagine. I'm certain couldn't imagine being in beyond those, and where life has taken you since.
Not only could I not imagine it when I was growing up, playing baseball and dreaming of playing in the major leagues, but as you read in the book, and this is, a story among many stories that Catherine beautifully captures, is my first day of spring training. I was the number one draft pick in the January 1980 draft. Back in those days, there were two drafts. The January draft's a little smaller than the one in June. But in any event, I was drafted in January, signed, and my first day of spring training, at Dodgertown at the time, the spring training complex for the LA Dodgers in Vero Beach, Florida. It's now in Arizona, but back then in Vero Beach, it was the only major league spring training complex at that time where the minor leaguers and the major leaguers were together. They lived together, they played together, all of these things. So that was a huge bonus. So I got to see all these famous players, playing poker, playing ping pong, just walking around. Well, my first day of spring training, I was there stretching. I'm nervous enough as it is. I'm stretching in the front line with other minor leaguers, other minor league pitchers. I was a pitcher. And Tommy Lasorda comes walking by, and he says, you, and you, come with me. And I was one of those four. And he brings us to the Major League spring training park. And he said, you're pitching batting practice. And oh my God, I was more nervous than ever. And he said, you're up first. And so I warmed up on the side in the bullpen. And then I came to the pitcher's mound. And as you know, Dan, you have a screen in front of you, when the pitchers throw batting practice to protect you from the 110 mile an hour line drives that the batters are hitting, because you're supposed to just groove it in there. Help them with their timing. You're not trying to strike them out or anything. I had never pitched on one of those things in my life. I had never done that. And so my first pitch, I'm a right-hander, I'm throwing, I short arm it because I'm afraid my arm's going to hit the screen. And when a right-hander short arms it, it goes up and in. And I was pitching first to Ron Say, Steve Garvey, Bill Russell, Davey Lopes, and Reggie Smith. The core of those championship teams,
Sure.
all stars. Borderline Hall of Famers. Perhaps a couple of them should be Hall of Famers. Ron Say was up first. That first pitch went right at his head, and he just collapsed into the dirt in a cloud of dust. And I went, "Oh my God! This is going to be the shortest pro baseball career in history." And he got up and gave me a really mean look, but I pulled it together and I finished with him. I threw to the rest of them, and when I was done, Steve Harvey, he looks at me and says, "Good job, kid." And then Tommy Lasorda says, "Great job, kid. Now get out of here. Go back to the minor league complex." And that was one of the great, great lessons of my life that to this day still influences me, and that I've never been nervous again, or at least that nervous. I was incredibly nervous. I almost got, I almost probably got fired at the first day, but I survived. I got through it. I did well enough. I did okay. And so, as you know, as you've read, I've met, a lot of uh, famous people, presidents, Middle East leaders, been in some hairy situations, and I've never been very nervous because nothing will ever make me more nervous than that day, and I made it through. So that was a great lesson in life.
You almost took out the penguin.
I almost took out the penguin.
You did.
Maybe if he wasn't so short, I would have really beat him.
Well, I mean, that is noteworthy because, Catherine, as you draw throughout the book and the different people you interviewed, just the correlations and the leveraging that David used from those years on the mound, which in hindsight, compared to the rest of your professional life, were so short, but so powerful to take those experiences through hostage negotiations, through very dangerous areas, through I think you've only been poisoned twice, I could gather. Was it maybe 2 times? Right.
Yes, twice.
Yeah. So, Catherine, what was so clear for you as you were pulling this thing apart and putting it together about those threads, those patterns?
Well, and I think the word resilience comes to mind immediately, and we all need that in our lives, whatever we're doing, whether we're trying to play baseball or make peace in the Middle East. And David's resilience was certainly it started early in his life, but through all the other things that you mentioned that are in the book, all kinds of experiences where he needed to call on that. And I'm so glad you mentioned the other people that I interviewed for the book, probably more than 50 of David's colleagues, and many of them just remarkable leaders from lots of different professions and backgrounds. But each of them had a story too about their resilience and their reliance on things like empathy and how important that is, and dignity when you are trying to resolve problems. So these wonderful life lessons, not only David's life, but these wonderful people that he put me in touch with, I think really enrich the story. And the threads, as you said, all weave together to make this tapestry that is really, at the end of the day, not only the story of David Lesch, but also a story of what we can do in our own lives if we harness some of these things. Maybe we won't be able to make peace in the Middle East happen, but just in our own lives, our daily lives with what we do, our families, our loved ones, our work, all of these skills and abilities certainly translate to that.
So you can see, Dr. Dan, she talks how she writes very beautifully and in a very
Yes.
articulate manner. So
Yes.
I was always very, very impressed with Catherine from the second I met her. And I have a prop, if I may.
Yes.
I don't know if you can see this. It's a ring. Catherine knows very well what this is. And it's the championship ring from my one full year in the minor leagues in the Pioneer League I was with the Lethbridge Dodgers in Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada. And they're no longer there. The Pioneer League at the time, but the equivalent of a single A team. And when I first met Catherine, I brought this with me when we first talked about the biography. And Catherine, being Catherine, she had done a lot of research. She knew a lot about me, had already read some things about me, and etc. She didn't know about this, obviously. And I showed her this ring for two reasons. One, I had very little to do with this championship. And it's a championship ring. There's no diamonds on it because it's minor league, not major league. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't the star player or even one of the stars. I was injured most of the year. Um, I was 1-0. I'm undefeated as a pro, but that 1-0 was when I blew when I blew the lead, and our team came back to score runs in the bottom half of that inning, so I got the win. So there was a very humbling experience. And then the following year, when the rotator cuff, I had to, ended my professional baseball career. Again, it was very, very humbling. And so, at the core of sports is failure, as you know. And sports for me, including this particular experience, uh, really prepared me for life. Because, as you know, I mean, in baseball as a hitter, you're successful 30% of the time, you go to Hall of Fame,
Right.
and you fail 70% of the time. And so most people in sports fail, and you fail and you fail, but you keep trying and you keep working at it, and hopefully you succeed at some point. And as Catherine said, this translated very well into Middle East negotiations and conflict resolution because, boy, you fail all the time there. And you keep failing and you keep failing, and you have to be persistent and persevere and patient. And that will hopefully end up with success down the road, or at least some success. So again, for me, sports was provided that lesson over and over and over.
And I think the humility that you speak of, and what the resilience that Catherine spoke of, is to go from the number one pitching prospect in the country on one of the greatest teams at the time, and one of the legendary teams with legendary players, to transitioning back to education, and not quite sure where exactly you're going to go, close to, you're close to your family, um, and I just imagine it was like a starting over in I mean, in many ways.
Yeah, it was. I never really got too down, and I don't know. I don't understand why. When I was released, I had that meeting the following year. The coach called me into the office and said, "David, how are you doing?" I was very frank. I said, "Well, not very well." And I didn't know why. I knew I had pain in the shoulder, but I found out later it's because of the rotator cuff. And he said, "Well, we're releasing you," which is a euphemism for being fired, right?
Mhm.
And but I never really felt down. I always felt confident. Maybe this is part of my upbringing. Maybe it's part of that resiliency. I always felt that I could find something else. And I searched for a little while. I went back to college. I guess one thing, Dr. Dan, is that was good about my brief baseball career is that it was brief. In other words, I didn't flounder in the minors for 7, 8 years and be a borderline major leaguer. And then when you get out, what do you do? Not that this is a bad thing, but I may not have the training to be anything other than, go back to my high school and be the baseball coach. And so I went back to college, didn't lose much time, and met some wonderful professors who turned me on to the Middle East. And after searching a few, other potential professions and majors, and the rest was history. So I think all of that transition in retrospect obviously seems more seamless than it actually was at the time. I probably was a little bit more upset than I remember, but I think because I've done well in my career since then, I don't mind going through all that. That was, I'm
Mm.
almost happy I went through all that stuff because
Mhm.
it really fortified me for the future.
Yeah, it defined you, helped make you, defined you, fortified you, and I guess, Catherine, a question for you, in your unique look with David, because as I was reading about his earlier life, and it felt very downplayed, in terms of, he was the best, one of the best. Everyone's looking at him. People are cheating to try to get to you, and it still felt that there was just, from a personality perspective, and from what I now know about your upbringing, very wholesome family upbringing. Was there this just inherent humility that David had even when he was at the top of baseball?
I think so. From the people I spoke with, friends of his from childhood, all used the word humility. I see it in him even today with all the things he's done and really the remarkable achievements. That humility has never left. It's in everything he does, but it obviously started early. His friends all commented on it, and there was a cute story about one of David saying something like, he didn't think any girl would really want to go out with him because he wore glasses and he was studying in school. And this is when he was a high school star of both baseball and basketball. And of course, that modesty and that humility uh, are so adorable in these days, when I think we find people that don't have that all the time. And everyone else, of course, saw this remarkable star. And finally, senior year, the cutest girl in school and the cheerleader let him know that she liked him. And so there are those things, and that humility is quite a remarkable facet of
Mhm.
David, and
Yeah.
it's still just as true today. Absolutely.
When I
Well,
like that picture.
thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, I like that picture of you with your glasses, and of course, that was
They're horrible. They were
that no,
huge
no,
and horrible.
but that was far before, Charlie Sheen as Wild Thing in Major League, the movie, like, that was huge. That
Yeah,
became the look, but
yeah,
this
exactly,
was way before
exactly.
you. You were first to market, first to market. Um, so the Middle East, I mean, you are arguably now the foremost authority on Syria, among other aspects of the region and the conflict. And there's just something there that drew you, like something that drew you. And my one just personal experience that I'll say is the current is, my wife and I, for the first time, were in that region a little over a month ago. We went
Wow.
to Egypt,
Mhm.
which had been something that we've been wanting to do a long time, and it was transformative. It was largely spending time in the ancient sites of Egypt.
Sure.
Um, but there's was something that we could not describe in terms of being in the ancient land and then seeing the pictures and just some of the stories and the places where you went to. Um, I was capturing that feeling as Catherine was describing it. And so if you could describe, like, what was it and is it about this region of the world that drew you in and has been something you've been committed to for decades?
Well, we have something in common. My first time to the Middle East was also in Egypt in 1984. I spent 3 or 4 months there. And I think first what drew me to Egypt were those two professors I mentioned earlier at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, Lou Cantori and Robert Friedman. And Lou Cantori passed away, but Catherine was able to talk to Robert Friedman for the book. And they just kind of brought it alive to me. And I was always interested in international affairs. Remember, this is late 70s, early 80s when I'm in college, before and after baseball, and a lot was going on in the Middle East, as there usually is, but particularly then. You had the 1979 Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty, also in '79 the Iranian Revolution, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the 1980 Iran-Iraq War, the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon. So I kind of gravitated toward that area because, in my view, Americans in the West in general had a telescopic vision of the Middle East, not a microscopic one. And I was most interested in the microscopic vision. I really wanted to understand the nuances, the people, the culture, as well as I knew, of course, a lot about the history already. And so when I went to Egypt that first time, I think, and when I went to any of the Middle East countries for the first time, including Syria, it was the people, not just the history and incredible history, but the people themselves. And there's just a beautiful, wonderful people who've been dealt some difficult cards over the decades and even centuries, and they're dealing with it the best they can. And despite all of that, almost all of them, live with dignity and compassion and empathy, and that had a great effect on me. And in addition, the one professor, in fact, was Lou Cantora. He led the group of students when we went to Egypt that first time. He took us on a trip, I think, which is described in the book, where we went to this place that colloquially is called People of the Trash. And it was this big trash dump with open sewage. And of course, we were all looking at Lou Cantori saying, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this?" And we had to put handkerchiefs on our nose because the stench was just too much. And all of a sudden, we saw people moving in the trash, and this was a community living in the trash. And yet they came out and welcomed us. Some of them wanted us to come in and feed us, probably with a month's worth of food that they had supply. And that was a seminal event in my life, seeing what poverty really is. We speak about poor in the United States. Poor in many areas of the United States, poor areas of cities, so-called, would be upper class compared to this particular situation. And so it was my first encounter with absolute destitute poverty, and yet they were so hospitable and so wonderful. And I saw that over and over and over. And so, not only my interest in an area of the world that Westerners knew not very little, but a lot of misinformation about, but because of my care for these people and respect for these people, I wanted to do whatever I could down the road once I was able to do so and built up enough credentials to do so, to try to help improve their lives in conflict areas, or just bringing projects that would help the economy or something like that.
Hmm. Catherine, from your research, do you recall? Ask you first, David, and then you second. Was there a time when it went from study to scholar to activist, in a sense? And I don't think activist is the right word, but somewhere along, you were learning, and then at some point you had some very strong thoughts about how things could be, and started to write about them and make these suggestions, actually
Mhm.
put yourself out there. And so, Catherine, you first, from your perspective, did you see a point in time when there was that shift in him?
I think so, and it'll be interesting to see if David agrees that it was the same point. Uh, and we were talking about the late 70s, and you were in LA. You remember those long, or your parents remember those long gas lines. And of
Oh, I
course,
remember
David
them
was,
very well.
yeah,
Mm,
and
mm,
David was just a young man then. So I think most of
yeah.
us in the United States, our views of the Middle East had to do with oil, and we knew, in general, I think we knew very little about it, but we did know we were inconvenienced by those long gas lines. And I think David, as a young man returning to Harvard, just leaving baseball, realized that this was a part of the world that was hugely important and going to become more so in all of our lives. So some of it was timing, but I would put my finger, I think, David, if I had to, on when you actually went over to study in the archives from Harvard and spent your time first in London and Paris and then Damascus, uh, interacting with the people and talking to the people who live there about all of these different events, and understanding how diverse the voices are. That diversity of voices certainly, I think, if I moved you from scholar, uh, learning, reading, writing, to this interactive period where you are hearing these diverse voices from all over the world, and specifically Syria, and realizing that it's bigger than study, and that it is a much bigger world out there, and that sort of took then that great story about the Russians as you were leaving Syria that came in on the ship, and the ship got blown up, and all sorts of real world drama to things that we had just sort of thought of far, far away. Do
That's
you?
interesting, Catherine. I wasn't thinking of that, but I think perhaps subconsciously you're correct, and that certainly is a time. This was in 1989. I spent a few months in Syria for the first time, and it was a period when not many Westerners were in Syria, and I was a poor graduate student. I was conducting research for my dissertation, so I had to stay in these flea bag hotels, take these what are called microbuses, that everyone kind of packs into. But that's when you really learn about the country. You don't stay in the resorts, and just go to the sites. I was compelled to learn about the people in the country, and I fell in love with it. But I'm going to maybe point to a different moment, and I have two in mind. And the reason I'm not saying that one is that I don't think I yet understood what could happen as an academic. At the time, I just kind of like wanted to get my dissertation done, get my PhD, and find a job. And that was my focus. I had no grand visions for saving the world, although growing up Roman Catholic young boy, we're all supposed to save the world and martyr ourselves, right? But uh, it came, I think, one or two spots. I think is in. I think it was 1998. I went back to Syria again. I'd been back several times since my first time, and that's when I first was introduced to some very influential people in Syria, including a brief meeting, my first ever meeting with Bashar al-Assad, who at the time was being groomed to be successor to his father. And I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. My academic studies and orientation and focus of study has brought me to this point. And what can I do with it now? And so I think that's when I started to conjure up some ideas on maybe going beyond the strict academic. And then when it really took off, of course, is when I started meeting with Bashar al-Assad in 2004, when I came up with the idea of writing a biography on him, and he agreed. And that's when everything kind of exploded in terms of what types of things I could engage in beyond strict academic pursuits, in terms of diplomacy, in terms of becoming an unofficial liaison between Damascus and Washington at a time when U.S.-Syrian relations were very conflictual, and um, and then what could happen after that? That maybe I could be in a position to affect some change as we go forward.
Hmm. And this is living history. Bashar al-Assad, president up until December of this
Right.
past
Yeah.
year, and his father, the 30-ish years before him. So, um, tremendous change, which I want to talk about
Mhm.
um, with you. Um, but the first I have to highlight, there is one odd thing that Bashar and I have in common. My first CD that I purchased in 1988
Uh,
was of none other than ELO.
ELO.
That's
Oh,
probably one of the few things that we have in common.
Yeah.
But very cool how the
Yeah, he as of course and covered in the book, he was a
yeah.
big fan of ELO, and as you know, Jeff Lynne found out about that, and gosh, Catherine, maybe you have to remind me. I forget my own story, but somehow Jeff Lynne. I know there was a story on my relationship with Bashar al-Assad in the L.A. Times, and Jeff Lynne read about it, and he and his agent got in touch with me, and he said, "Well, maybe how about let's have a concert or something in Damascus." And he sent me a bunch of CDs and a personal note and a thank you note to me to bring to Bashar al-Assad, and I did. It never materialized, but that was one of those out of left field things that happens when you dip your toe into those types of circles.
I love it too because there's that it illustrates common ground with
Yeah,
even the most diverse people. Things like music and children, and they're things that
mhm,
just let you know that we're all human beings and there
Yeah.
is a common ground. Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, and common ground, of course, being a major theme in the work that you've done in policy and negotiation, in leadership, in commentary, and that's where I actually wanted to go with the complexity and it seems the neutrality. I mean, like as the story unfolds. So here you is it fair to say befriend Bashar al-Assad? I mean, you guys are almost like coming up together in your own careers. Um, he's a ophthalmology student with different plans for his life, and here you both find yourselves together in this very poignant time in history and create a relationship that spans for decades. And then I want to say neutrality, but you've also had to speak out because things change. He changes, the world changes, the complexity of the Middle East, decisions that you perhaps aren't agreeing with. You were trying to guide him. You were trying to
Mhm.
offer help, not only for him, but of course for the people and the country. And it just I found myself and Catherine wondering, like, as the writer and the researcher of this, the complexity and I want to say pain as a reader of seeing the conflict as the relationship was changing and you were no longer listened to and you needed to take a I would say a moral political socio-political stand on what you believed should happen.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Catherine, did you want to comment?
Just to agree, and again, it's one of the reasons why I loved writing the book. I think that everything you just said is true, and that it's on the world stage we're talking about. But I think all the points you just made can also be whittled down, if you will, to our individual life stages that we have with our relationships, with what we do day by day, with our work, with our families, with our bosses. With people you have put your trust in and think are going to be one way, and then circumstances change and it changes. So it's that just flowing need to constantly be resilient and recognize that the world changes. That goes back to a question you asked much earlier in our conversation, that when these things go wrong for you and you suddenly have to reinvent yourself, which at times we all have to, where do you find the necessary skills to do that? And I think David did watch that happening exactly as you said. And as I said, on the world stage, where the world watched in horror when Bashar al Assad began to do some of the monstrous things he did. But on a lesser degree, we've seen people that we care about change dramatically and do things we wouldn't have done. And it's very interesting how we deal with it, how we listen, how we shift. It's just part of going forward, I think.
It's interesting. Well put, Catherine. Thank you. And is when I first met with Asma al-Assad, the first lady of Syria, Bashar's wife, and we were only scheduled to meet for maybe half hour, 45 minutes. And the first question she asked me, in a somewhat suspicious tone, was, "Why are you writing this book?" There's a great deal of mistrust of Westerners coming in and so forth. And Dr. Dan, you picked up on the commonality that Bashar and I had. We started out in one profession and went almost completely in the opposite direction. And he was a ophthalmologist, and of course, after his older brother died, who was being groomed to be the next president, he took over and became the next one, and unexpectedly, I think. And of course, I had my own transition from baseball to academia at a much smaller level than his. But so I think we had that commonality. I ended up meeting with Asma for 3.5 hours, so obviously she liked that response. Uh, and it was difficult for me. I wouldn't say we had a friendship. We were friendly. Um, Sometimes it's hard, and I was accused, in certain circles of being too lenient on him. And this can happen. I mean, when you have access to someone sometimes you have to swallow some words to maintain that access, because if you call them, if I started calling him a brutal dictator from the beginning, which I don't think anyone thought he was at the time, I would not have the opportunity to meet with him. And it's a bit of a cost-benefit analysis. Some have, again, accused me of not being harder on him. I eventually did, when I think there was no choice but to do so. But it was difficult for me personally to see the growing authoritarianism in him. He grew more comfortable with power, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But if it's an authoritarian system, that means he's going to be much more comfortable being an authoritarian leader. And I saw him start to believe the sycophants around him and the hype around him. And he started to equate the idea that the well-being of the country was synonymous with his well-being. And, it's an old adage, of course, that absolute power corrupts absolutely, but it's an old adage because it happens. It happens quite a bit. And so I got to see this evolution and progression in him. He was always very unpretentious and unprepossessing and very polite and courteous to me. But the turning point, which is covered in the book, was that 2007 election, when the presidential term in Syria is 7 years. He came to power in 2000. 2007 was the first time he was reelected. Now, it's not a free election, of course. It's a referendum. There's only one person running. It was Bashar al-Assad, no one else. And it's a yes-no referendum. And I went to the polling places, and I saw him the day that his election victory was announced, with 97% of the vote. And he had always been kind of humble and self-deprecating. And when I asked him, so what do you think of that, Mr. President? You got 97% of the vote. And he looked at me and he said, well, the people love me. They love me. And I was like taken aback, because you have to know, Mr. President, I didn't say this, but I thought it to myself, you have to know that this was all arranged. This is not a real election, but he internalized it. And I think he had gone through a lot. He and his country had gone through a lot. Maybe this was somewhat cathartic. And the pomp and circumstance that he eschewed up until that time, as opposed to what his father had done, and which was one of the attractive things about his time in power till then, all returned. All the pomp and circumstance, the big billboards and posters of him and songs about him and all these sorts of things. And that's when I thought he had crossed over. That's when I thought that he felt that he should be president for life, and that the people want him. And I was a bit disappointed in that. But I'm not in his shoes. I'm not surrounded by, all these people that say you're the savior of Syria and you're almost semi-divine. My head gets big when I get good student evaluations. So much less, being surrounded by in a presidential office and with all of these ministers saying you're wonderful. So, but it was disappointing to see that. And so when he authorized or turned a blind eye toward many of the atrocities that occurred during his first 10 years, and certainly during the Syrian civil war that Catherine talked about, it was not a shock to me, because I saw that progression. And so, everything he engaged in, there was a rationalization for it, that he's saving the country, saving a way of life, and preventing outside powers from using the Syrian people against what is the right way of life in Syria.
I have a list of all these quotes, references that Catherine wrote about where people are talking about you. And we know your students love you. We know your students love you, right? So that's true. You can say that. Your students love you.
Not all the time. Not all
the time, but yeah, largely. And earlier, the word that came to me as we were talking, and Catherine, tell me if this word if you used it specifically or not, because I just kind of like distilled it, is integrity. Because there's so many words that are used by your peers, your former students, your colleagues to describe you. And integrity is just something that came to me. And Catherine, is that, talk about
Yes,
that.
it's a great word, and it did come up in lots and lots of the interviews. And of course, we can't tell this story without talking to David's wonderful wife, Judy Dunlap. And she's, of course, known him a long time. And integrity is one of the characteristics that first drew her to David. And she talks about that very beautifully in the book. And it's important. And I think when he's talked to all these different viewpoints, all over in whatever the crisis or the issue might be, there is integrity in the way he listens. And so I would couple with integrity throughout also the word listener. He has great integrity and is an amazing listener to every voice. And as he was explaining about Bashar al Assad, tries very hard to put his feet into the shoes of whoever he's talking to, whatever they're going through, and does that with integrity and grace. It's a great word.
Mm-hmm.
Very definitely one that flows through the story.
How does that sit with you, David? And how natural does that come to you versus intentionality?
That's a great question. Speaking of my wife Judy, someone asked her about why didn't David write, the biography himself, an autobiography, and Judy said because he would have left out half the stuff. Because I just don't like talking about this. This is uncomfortable for me right now. I'm very appreciative, and Catherine is wonderful, but this is uncomfortable for me. And in fact, this whole thing was very strange. But it was eye opening as well, because I saw an interest. I was forced to be introspective and compelled to look back on what all these people said about me throughout my life, from childhood years all the way till recently. And it forced me to put to see what I thought came naturally. That behavior, that natural behavior, what I thought was natural behavior, was actually respected and admired by others. And you know and that was eye opening for me, because it's just my life. I know I've done some interesting, unique things. I'm not gonna be that humble, but uh, but to hear these people that I really respect and admire, myself, who I've worked with, like William Ury and Herrera Belian, and a number of others, Jeffrey Feltman, and hear what they
Very,
had to say.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, very,
hear what
yeah.
they had to say. That was very eye opening for me, and again, to see that some of these things that, as I said earlier, just came naturally. And I guess I have to thank my parents, and my family and my upbringing, that this stuff comes naturally. And as I say, I mean, my definition of integrity is doing the right thing when no one's looking. And I think that's very, very important. And I really do think that people of like mind in that tend to coalesce around each other and find each other. I really do believe that. And when you find these people and you work with them, and I mean, great things. There's a possibility of great things happening. And so I've been very fortunate in that regard. I don't think I don't have any secret sauce. I don't, to say do this, do that, and you'll be this, or you'll all of a sudden have integrity. It's just something you have. You can develop. You can develop more. I think you can make mistakes. There were times that, certainly early on in my life, when I did stupid stuff and anything but integrity involved. But you learn from that, and you mature, and you hang around people that have a lot of integrity. One of my great friends and colleagues, John McCusker, who Catherine interviewed. He was the first Ewing Housel Distinguished Professor at Trinity University, and I succeeded him. And and he was a model, for me. And I used to go in and say, how would you react to this? How would you, respond to this situation? And so I think, you know, having friends like that and mentors like that is very, very important to helping you show the way, helping show the way to you and how you should act in similar situations. And even though it's on a smaller scale of a situation with another colleague or students at a university, the way you act in these types of things can be extrapolated to a larger picture and a larger scale in diplomacy and negotiations and conflict resolution.
I think I would add two things to what David just said. You asked early, Dr. Dan, why in the book I had taken sort of a gentle approach to who David was. And I wanted the people I interviewed to tell the reader who David is and not be the voice of the author saying, isn't he great? Look what he's done. I think a reader likes to be taken along on that journey and make that decision from rather subtle writing. I think I tried to do that. And the people I interviewed did not disappoint because they
Mhm.
said absolutely great things about David, which proved the point. And at the end of the book, the reader has formed that opinion. And I would say, too, one more thing about integrity. I think for anyone who is searching in life, which we all do from time to time, that if we identify people with integrity, find them. Who are they? What are they doing? And somehow get into that orbit. I actually think it does kind of rub off. So I think
Mhm.
integrity is just an amazing gift, which David has. And I think all of us can benefit from being around it.
Agreed, and mission accomplished by your goal for the reader. That was my
Thank you.
experience.
Thank you.
Um, uh, Continuing with the pattern, I'm interested to get Catherine your take first, as the writer of the story, and then David, of course, as the person who's lived it. Like two things came to me and come to me on this vein. One is you're driven. It seems to me you're driven by what you feel is right. What is the right thing to do? And I feel like that propelled you to leadership as opposed to you seeking leadership. You find yourself talking to presidents, talking to multiple different political figures, committees, writing papers, leading committees, um, leading envoys. And I never felt it was because you wanted to be in charge and you wanted to be a leader. I know you don't have trouble being on the mound. I know you have, trouble with all eyes on you, but that's different than someone who seeks it for its own sake rather than because one is compelled by the mission. Catherine, how about you first?
I think you're absolutely right. I think you nailed it. And absolutely the examples throughout the book of that occurring are there. David was not seeking to be any of those things, including the number one draft pick, as hard as he was working in baseball. And but when he achieved certain uh, things in what he was working on, whether sports or academics or conflict resolution, others around him saw this and gravitated to him. And I think leadership, the best leadership, in my opinion, evolves from that as opposed to the person that walks in and says, now I'm going to lead this group. It's a natural phenomenon that people spot a leader and turn to that person. And David certainly has done that in all the things he's touched. I think you're right.
I have a story along these lines. My wife, Judy, she used to, she was a realtor, and and she has her team, and she would have these dinners with her team as well as some clients at a nearby steakhouse, J Prime. It became very influential in my life, a place to have meetings of all sorts. And she got very upset at me after several of these things happened, and that by the end of the evening, she said, all the waiters and everybody they were turning to you. They were asking you, and you kind of directed things, uh, by the end of the evening. And I never sought that. I was just, fly on the wall there. She's the main show, and she was the head of the team, and she disliked that. She said, "I'm not going to invite you anymore to these things." But she finally realized. She said that's just how it is, because she's seen me in many different scenarios, many different situations, and she's seen it over and over and over again. And Catherine's right, and you're right. That's very perceptive, Dr. Dan, of you. That I don't seek it; it just happens, and the best situation is when you have, and I've been able to experience this, a bunch of leaders, unintentional leaders together, who don't care who gets the credit, uh, and we kind of, you know, we became attracted to each other because of these traits. And that's the most brilliant thing that I've experienced when I'm with these groups in conflict resolution teams, negotiations, or something, and it's wonderful. And so I think, as Catherine said earlier, you tend to be drawn to these type of people. But no, it's not something I seek. It's not something I shy away from. Should it fall into my sphere or lap or whatever. But I hope that, more importantly, is the mission being accomplished? Is the goal being accomplished? Are we making progress?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the things that I'm most interested in. And the best situations when there's not like one leader who's dominating or anything. It's a bunch of people equally dominating, who are like-minded.
Well, and you both have had a life of service and trying to make things better, whether it's cultures, whether it's environment, whether our planet, um, diversity of people, diversity of thought. And we, of course, are um, at a place in history. Not only does the Middle East continue to be the Middle East in terms of the complexity and the conflict and 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 the nuances that you know far more about than I and many. And then on our own land here, we have so much uh, conflict, polarization. And so, what what do we need to be doing? You've done conflict resolution. You've been in hostage, serious negotiation situations. There are, and it's in the book. There are some of the steps that you take.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the tenets that Catherine included at the end for the listeners, right? All of us people who are every day just wanting to do something. Where do we start?
Well, I have a story, and this is something I've been developing. Catherine knows about it. It's something I'm calling threads, and it's not a revolutionary concept. It's a repackaging of existing concepts, I think. And I was in Fredericksburg, Texas. It's the middle of the wine country in the hill country of Texas, and I've become very fond of Fredericksburg, small town. And they have nice restaurants and bars and galleries and shopping and so forth. And I went there for a couple of nights, I guess back in June. Judy, my wife, was out with some of her friends on one of her semi-annual getaways, and so I thought, oh, let me just go up there. I'll write and relax and so forth. And I went to this one music venue, and we were listening to some what I call hefty Texas blues. And this guy was next to me, and we spoke a little bit, shared some thoughts and glances. And if you saw the both of us, you'd say we are polar opposites, socioculturally, politically, in every way possible. And there's no way we could, get along or enjoy each other's company. And credit to him, I think I probably thought that. I was like, stay away, stay a couple of seats away, please. But credit to him, he came over and said, hey, can I sit here? And so we just started talking. And we talked about music. We talked about family. We talked about travel because he was in the oil and gas industry working on oil rigs around the world. And he'd been to exotic places. And we left as friends. And so I call that threads. We found positive threads with each other. I'm sure if we wanted to, we could find some negative ones. But it's a choice.
Mm-hmm.
It's a choice you make to find positive threads, to go through the mental Rolodex in your head and say, hey, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. Let's focus. And that dials down the heat so that maybe you can have civil discourse about political differences and so forth. And so, what Catherine was talking about earlier, it's listening. Pause and listen. Pause and listen and try to understand his or her conceptual paradigm. Why are they thinking the way they do? There's reasons for this. And I know it's a cliche. We're all, much more alike than we are different, but we are. Mm-hmm. And we're much more united than divided in most things. Yeah. I mean, we root together at sporting events, at the movie theater. We concern together at hospitals. We mourn together at funerals. We come together in these moments. So you can find those positive threads. And I think we have a choice. And if we make an effort to find these positive threads and listen, then, as a society, we can dial down the heat. It doesn't mean we're going to love each other, but we can tolerate each other and live together and find this common ground to move forward.
Yes. And Catherine, before you respond, David just reminded me of something you wrote that I want to read right now.
Okay.
As context for your next response. And it was talking a bit about this. You wrote, His Holiness the Dalai Lama summed it up succinctly in his book about happiness, which is a great book. If you watch children playing together, they don't ask each other about their background, race, or beliefs. They simply recognize others like themselves, smile, and play together. I believe that we as human beings, of all 7 billion of us, are the same. The way we're born, the way we die is the same. The way we eat, sleep, and dream is the same. As human beings, we are the same, and this is something we need to think more about.
Dr. Dan, you're the best. I will tell you that I knew you were going to ask me next, and that's what I was going to read.
We're locked in.
This is what I want to say just to conclude what David said. So that's exactly how I feel. I would add one more thing though, and it's just an urging to all of us as human beings to be more courteous. I'm so worried in this day and time, and I know that when we first brought this last conversational piece up about the lack of courtesy. And I think we need the courtesy in order to then move into what David was describing and the Dalai Lama is what he was describing, the courtesy to again listen, but be courteous in the way we hear. It worries me that seems to be slipping away a bit in our culture.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important. I think it's important not to block each other, like Facebook and other social media. People, if they don't agree with them, they block them, or and in friends, you lose friendships over this. I purposely do not block any Facebook friends who put up some ideas with which I vehemently disagree. I want to hear what they have to say. I want to understand what they have to say. And so by blocking and you isolate yourself, and it just further socially fragments society and culturally isolates people from each other. So listen, as I said, pause and listen. Be willing to listen, even if it makes your head boil. And take a step back, look at the big picture, and then maybe we can start to find that those meeting places of the mind, of the heart, and the soul.
And as the Dalai Lama said, we'll be happier.
We will be happier.
Yes.
A
Yes.
final question for you both. Catherine, you first. And it's the same question. How do you keep hope?
That's so interesting. Because you've read the book, I asked every one of the people I interviewed who are there in the trenches doing conflict resolution how they keep hope, because I know they've seen some of the darkest things. And I think I liked Bill Urey's answer really well. He said people used to ask him if he was an optimist, and he would say yes. And that now he doesn't say he is an optimist, he is a possibilist. And that for him, hope is the small changes that are occurring right now, every moment, as opposed to way in the future. That was very helpful to me, because at times I feel like hope has been elusive in these last bits of watching our history unfold. So I'm following that advice from Bill Urey and trying to think of it in small increments. And at the same time, I see the joy of a smiling child and a growing flower. And my husband and I spend a lot of time with nature at a very small farm in the country and surrounded by deer and turkeys. And I find hope walking through those beautiful scenarios, and basically believe that we humans are good people. And I think looking towards that's my answer for hope.
I'll respond very briefly, and I'll paraphrase Jane Goodall, who'd recently passed away, of course. And she was asked this one time, and she said, "What other choice is there?" And that's my answer. What other choice is there?
Mm.
We have to hope, and we have to maintain it. And certainly, anyone involved in Middle East negotiations, unless you have hope, you have no chance. And just seeing up close and personal how people in the Middle East, in war zones and so forth, have suffered immensely, and yet they still have hope, and they still have compassion and dignity. How can I not? How can I not have hope as well?
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to thank you both, David, for allowing this project to happen. And I understand there are times that it's not easy to sit through this and to be talked about. Uh, and and for Catherine, for the eloquence, the word. You are a word artist, and a historian, and so much more. The way you blend the story together.
Yes.
This is a story that needed to be told. It really needed to be told. I learned tremendously, not only about life, not only about leadership, resilience, failure, reinvention, but so much about the Middle East, Syria, the conflict, the complexities, and all of these markers growing up, remembering how old I was when there were the hostages, when I'm watching CNN, Operation Desert Storm, and will the draft come back and call, all of these moments, but from behind the scenes, of what was really going on, and all the work and the effort that was going in, and the things that worked, the things that didn't work. It's rich. This is so rich. So thank you both for your time and your contribution.
And thank you for this podcast. I think it delivers hope in a very important way. I am really looking forward to following it more, and I have now subscribed. So
All
thank
right.
you. Thank
Thank
you, Dr. Dan.
you.
It's been a great
Thank
time.
you.
Yeah, Dr. Dan, I want to schedule some sessions with you now. So,
Anytime, David.
all right,
Anytime.
brother. Thank you. You're fantastic.
All right. Tell everyone, whoever gets to do this, where to find the book, and also just what you each are doing now. You're all, you guys, I know, are both. Everyone's working on something. So anything that you want to share before we sign off.
You go first, David.
Just keep trying. We talk about perseverance and persistence, and I'm currently involved in some efforts with the new government in Syria, and it's stop and go, but just keep trying. And whatever you're engaged in that helps people and helps enlighten and illuminate the world, keep trying.
I'm honored. The book has been chosen for some book festivals coming up in the fall and the new year, and we're presenting in New York in a month or two. And that's very rewarding to see this reaction. And of course, people can buy the book on Amazon or from the publisher, Trinity University Press. You asked, there's our little blurb, but working on for the future, I'm actually working on a children's book that talks a little bit about the power of nature, the nature there at the farm of the deer and the turkeys to enlighten and delight. So that's my next project.
As you continue to
that.
expand as well. Yeah. Well, thank you both and wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
What a
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Thank you.
It was an absolute joy to talk with both David and Catherine, two remarkable human beings doing the work of service, growing and expanding, and making the world a better place. There are several key takeaways from this conversation, and here are 5. Number 1, resilience is universal. Whether on the baseball field or in international conflict, growth begins with how we recover from failure. Number 2, humility builds trust. True leadership doesn't come from seeking power, it comes from integrity and service. Number 3, connection starts with listening. Real diplomacy and real relationships begin when we pause to understand another's perspective. Number 4, hope is an active choice. In uncertainty and division, we can choose possibility over despair. And number 5, common ground heals. From politics to personal life, finding threads of shared humanity can turn conflict into conversation. So much wisdom, so much awareness, so much compassion, and so much human spirit in this conversation. It's inspiring. It inspired me. I hope it inspired you as well. Please share this episode with anyone you think will benefit. Thank you for your 5-star reviews, your subscribing, and being a part of this amazing community. Remember, we have a new growth path quiz. Find out where you are on your growth path, your growth type, your strengths, your challenges, your edges, and resources to keep you on your way. Go to www.drdanpeters.com/quiz. And remember, we have this moment, this day, and this life. Let's make it a great one. This has been a Peters and Rossi production. Make It a Great One with Dr. Dan is produced by Laura Rossi. Our engineer is Phil Rossi. Theme music is Uplifting Folk by Awesome Music. Artwork by Kelly Dwyer. Follow us on social media at Dr. Dan Peters. For more information, visit drdanpeters.com.